The nation of Haiti is on the verge of anarchy. There's not been an election since 2016, and gangs have taken over, marauding the streets, pirating food shipments, and losing any sense of security that the Haitians once had. Now, in fact, one Haitian warlord, Johnson Andre, also known as Ezo, has been using social media to recruit gang members to expand his chokehold on the capital, Port-au-Prince. Now, his accounts were suspended last week, but here's one example of a very highly produced video released by the armed group that Ezo leads called the Unity of God. Let's watch. With us today to discuss the situation on the ground and U.S. involvement in the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere is Jake Johnston, author of Aid State, Elite Panic, Disaster Capitalism, and the Battle to Control Haiti. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's begin by discussing maybe the situation on the ground. How in control of the capital are these gang leaders? What can you tell us about Ezo, this figure whose video we just watched?
Yeah, so what we saw was a significant change at the end of February, early March, where the disparate armed groups of the capital have ostensibly sort of joined forces, stopped fighting each other, and starting to fight the state. Initially designed to oust former prime minister, or sort of current prime minister, Ariel Henry. And I think we have to be clear about what control means, right? I mean, the armed groups exercise de facto control through terror over significant parts of the capital, but are certainly not taking over state functions or performing any actual state role in the capital or elsewhere.
I recently interviewed a journalist who has been to Haiti and interviewed one of the gang leaders, informally known as Barbecue, who got a lot of media headlines after he was being accused of cannibalism and some other things that were not substantiated. The nickname comes from his mother having had a barbecue selling meats on the side of the road as a child. But his kind of portrait of what's going on there was a little bit more mixed. He described some people as believing that the kind of unity of the gangs in a central cause here, that's more of a political nature, had actually eliminated some violence in some areas, and really framed this as more of a political movement as opposed to the implications that are raised by a word like gang. And I wondered if you could speak to that sort of nuance and whether you think that's like a credible or legitimate characterization here.
Yeah, look, I think, there is certainly a media campaign here and an effort to try and portray these actions as part of some sort of a revolution or a political ideology. Look, regardless of whether one individual has that or Cherizier, this individual Barbecue, I think it's quite clear that overall the overall collective that is acting does not have one ideology or even any particular ideology. The primary victims of the violence, not just over the last 2 months, but the last many years, have been the most impoverished communities in Port-au-Prince. These are not playing the role of Robin Hood figures, though, of course, they do have a certain level of support and have protected their own communities to a certain level. And I don't think that can be underestimated. I also think, you have to look at the rhetoric, and whether we believe it or not, the rhetoric is not wrong, right? They're denouncing, or at least some people are denouncing, inequality, right? This state capture, the role of the international community. These are things that do resonate with the majority of people in Haiti, right? And so, do they actually trust that these are the actors that are going to support those goals? I don't think we've seen any evidence that that is the case. But, again, you have to understand the role that the international community has played over a very long time in Haiti, and we're seeing that play out right now. If the international community does not let Haitians actually chart their own path, I think it is, at least possible that more popular support shifts to the armed groups. But again, we have to look at who is actually the most victimized by their actions, and that is the most impoverished people, the most vulnerable people in Port-au-Prince and elsewhere in the country.
Let's talk more about the history of international involvement in Haiti and what the U.S. has been doing. How has that contributed to the situation the Haitians find themselves in?
Yeah, honestly, it's hard to overstate the role of the international community in Haiti. And here we could go back to the nation's founding in 1804, a successful slave revolt, the independence debt that it was forced to pay to Haiti and paid for over 100 years
To
that
France.
sapped the country of necessary resources. But even, coming into the more recent times, the first democratically elected president overthrown in a 1991 coup d'etat. Key leaders were on the CIA payroll. That same leader, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, was overthrown again in 2004 after the 2010 earthquake, billions of dollars in foreign aid, and you had the U.S. and others overturn the election results based on nothing. And so we've seen this process of continually thwarting the democratic aspirations of the Haitian people, while at the same time promoting aid and trade policies that have decimated state capacity, consolidated power and wealth in the most wealthy and oligarchic sort of families that have controlled Haiti for a long, long time. And so these policies have all totally eroded any notion of a sovereign democracy in Haiti. And I think that is ultimately the crisis that we're seeing manifested today on the ground.
And it's, oh, sorry.
I was just going to add, we're also seeing that a lot of the weapons, the ammunitions, the guns that the Haitian gangs have right now are actually come to them from the U.S. That was according to a UN report from a few weeks ago. What, if anything, does the U.S. government do to prevent arms from trafficking through the U.S. to Haiti?
Yeah, so no doubt this is a huge issue. Roughly 90% of the guns are estimated to be coming from the United States, either directly or through the Dominican Republic or other third parties, third countries. So, I don't think anyone's expecting the U.S. to abolish the Second Amendment on Haiti's behalf, but certainly there could be much more done to try and limit the flow, the illegal trafficking of these weapons, and especially these high-powered weapons that we've seen arriving in Haiti in recent years. We know the routes, the mechanisms by which these guns are getting to Haiti, generally in small ships coming down the Miami River and docking, in smaller ports around Haiti, especially on the north coast. And yet the investigations that we've seen into this have generally focused on the sort of lowest level, the straw purchasers on the U.S. side, and rarely actually go to the bigger players, the networks that are actually overseeing this, directing it, funding it, and providing the protection inside of Haiti to make sure that these weapons are distributed.
I mean, these gangs seem to have filled a void, a kind of a self-determination void that seems to be a consequence of the foreign meddling that you described. It also doesn't feel as though that foreign meddling is at an end. There were reports that there were efforts for Kenyan to recruit Kenyan troops, of all people, to come and try to create peace on the ground. This is after the UN said that it was too dangerous a situation for them to send their peacekeepers in. It has been a discussion, I think, a muted discussion because of how domestically unpopular it would be, but about whether or not American troops are the only ones that are basically left to intervene if it comes to that. And of course, with the CARICOM the kind of conference that's happening in Jamaica, I believe, to try to select new alternative leadership, that doesn't seem to be rooted in the kind of self-determination that Haitians are wanting for themselves. So can you speak to what you think the next steps are and what is likely to fill the kind of governance void that has emerged?
Yeah, I think this is obviously a huge question. I think, first off, the armed groups have shown no desire to actually fill that void or perform any sort of state functions, right? Certainly, they've protected their own narrow communities in certain respects, and in certain cases, these are very disparate groups that have different interests, right? They're not all the same. But to actually call them, as filling that role for providing services to the state, that is not really taking place. It's certainly not taking place right now. So we have these parallel processes, right, with the CARICOM and U.S.-backed political negotiations around a presidential council, and there have been reports that is, moving forward. And then on the ground, you've had this alternative proposal led by Guy Philippe, former paramilitary leader who was involved in the 2004 coup and actually was just deported from the U.S. after serving 6+ years on money laundering charges related to drug trafficking. And that individual, Guy Philippe, certainly seems to be at least operating in coordination with the armed groups, who, again, don't seem to be looking to take state power for themselves, but promoting other interests and other political interests to take power. And so, for me, I think the answer is that neither of them is enough on its own, right? I mean, there needs to be a broader discussion. There needs to be a broader debate. I think personally, from my own perspective, there needs to be lines of communication open between all parties in Haiti, armed or not, because, whether they're criminals in flip-flops or criminals in sandals, where do we draw these lines? It can't just be based on class. And so there needs to be a national dialogue. I think there are efforts to try and get that moving, to try and start that process. But none of these are short-term solutions or are going to be the long-term answer to Haitians' desires for a real democracy. They can be first steps that can open doors to paths to build on, right? And I think that's what the hope for is in the near term, is that there's something that can actually be built upon.
Jake Johnston, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.